How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Shifting Lanes. My name is Hanson, and for this video, you find me sitting in the 2023 Toyota BZ4X. First off, I want to thank Toyota for loaning me this tester for the week. This one is in the limited trim. It has all-wheel drive, and it can be yours after a few options and delivery for $52,468. And in this video, I want to give you my personal rating on 5 categories: the exterior, interior, the technology, power, and driving experience. And at the very end of the video, I want to give you my overall rating of this car. So if you want to jump into any of those sections, check out the chapters down below. And you definitely want to check out the section on the power, because there's something going on with this BZ4X. Without further ado, let's get started with the outside first. The BZ4X is Toyota's first EV available for the masses. Toyota made a RAV4 EV in the past for a very small number of people. There's also the Mirai, which is an electric car that runs on hydrogen, and it's only available in the California market. This time, anyone can buy an EV from Toyota, and this certainly has that look of an EV. The front end has no distinctive grille, there's minimal openings, there's just enough venting to keep the batteries cool, and then you'll find that the headlights blend into the rest of the body, while the two-tone paint scheme gives it a bolder and utilitarian look. The paint scheme is called heavy metal, and you can also get the black roof for an additional charge. And out back, you can find the optional split roof rear spoiler for that racier look. And then there's the LED taillights that's been conjoined together, giving it a more modern styling. Now, if this car looks familiar to you, it's because this is the same car as the Subaru Solterra with slight variations to it. Now, Toyota and Subaru worked once before on the GR86 and the BRZ. They came together and produced a really fantastic lightweight sports car. They're doing it again for this EV. Now, between the BZ4X and the Solterra, even though they look very close to each other, I'll have to pick the Toyota when it comes to the styling. I think the Toyota looks more grown up and stylish, while the Subaru Solterra looks a bit more nerdy and dorky, which is appealing in its own way. So I'll give the exterior a rating of 8 out of 10 because I think this is a cool looking EV. It has a quirky look, which I feel is like a car designer's goal nowadays, and this one certainly doesn't look boring. Inside the BZ4X, the design maintains that modern vibe with a dash of weird. The big 12.3-inch infotainment display, the digital cluster, and that hollowed out transmission tunnel gives it that modern flavor, while the carpeted dash and the spaceship-like steering wheel are some of the ways the designers like to keep it strange. And this steering wheel is a big turnoff for me, because for me to have my ideal seating position, the top of the steering wheel is constantly blocking that digital instrument cluster. So for me to have clear visibility of that display, I need to position the steering wheel all the way down, a lot lower than I'm used to. It's not that big of a deal because eventually you'll get used to it, but this just shows you where Toyota's heading with their design. Outside the US, you'll be able to buy the BZ4X with a steer-by-wire steering system, and with it, you'll get a yoke-style steering wheel instead of this traditional design. So you can see how a yoke steering wheel makes perfect sense here, and it'll give you a very clear view of the display. You can't get the yoke style steering wheel or steer by wire just yet for this BZ4X. That will soon become available. As for the center console, there's a mixture of physical and touch sensitive controls. The more important controls are still handled by physical dials, which I appreciate, but you'll notice that there's no volume control knob in this thing. Instead, that function has been split into 3 individual buttons, which I find to be a little bit annoying. But again, just like the steering wheel, if you have this thing, you're gonna get used to it. And down below the gear shifter, there's a dial with a lockout feature. This way you don't accidentally rotate it into a different gear. And then there's a series of buttons for your parking brake, the regen braking or one pedal driving, and there's various other controls for your all-wheel drive mode, eco driving, and your 360-degree camera view. As for the seating, the interior is the Softex black option. This is a faux leather material, which I like a lot. It doesn't get as hot as real leather in the summertime, and it still gives it that nice leather look and feel. The driver's seat has some powered adjustment to it, while the passenger is fully manual. And this limited model does come with both heat and ventilation features. And I love how there's an automatic setting in here for that as well. because that's almost what Lexus has with their Lexus Concierge feature. As for the second row, there's reasonable legroom at 35.3 inches. This model has heated outboard seats, and the view isn't so bad either with the panoramic roof. This seems to be like another design mishap where they have a large fancy piece of glass and then they just ruin the view by adding this structural member. And when you open up the powered liftgate, you'll find 27.7 cubic feet of space behind the second row. This model has just a tad less because of the JBL subwoofer in the back. There's also a dedicated space for your charging cable as well. And when you fold the second row down, you'll get a total of 56.9 maximum cubic feet of space. And if you open up the hood, there is no front trunk like you can find in other EVs. Instead, it's all just packed with all of the power management and all of the necessary cables for this EV to run. So I'll give the interior of the BZ4X a rating of 6 out of 10 because there's a lot of good traditional and modern design features in here. Yeah, sure, there's some weird things about it with the steering wheel and the lack of a volume control dial, but all of those things you can get used to. And personally, I'll be open to the yoke style steering wheel. I have never driven that before, so I can't say whether it's good or bad. But this dash design with the steering wheel, that's a little bit annoying. Now, when it comes to the technology, the BZ4X is much better than some of the other Toyotas you've seen in the past 4 to 5 years. And a lot of that has something to do with this infotainment system. Now, it's still not a perfect system. Nothing's ever perfect, but this is a big improvement. This uses a 12.3-inch touchscreen display, and the system is pretty responsive. When you pull up the 360-degree camera view, the large display is crisp and you have a very good view of everything. The menu layout makes sense and it's clearly laid out. The only problem I have with this thing is that there's no multi-view page that will show your navigation, your music, and other various metrics on the same display. To not utilize the large screen real estate seems like a missed opportunity. So you have to sort of jump through several menus to make very simple changes. Fortunately, you can use voice commands if you want to shortcut any of that. But the lack of a multi-view page may not matter at all because this thing comes with wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. And I prefer to use those systems over any system made by a car manufacturer. And if you want to charge your phone, there is a wireless charger in the center console. And during my testing, I've had pretty good luck charging with this thing. For some reason, in some Toyota models, the wireless charger isn't very reliable, but for this one, it's a lot better. Now, if you want to plug in traditionally, there's a USB port for every passenger that could fit in this car. There's 4 USB-Cs, 1 USB Type A, and 1 12-volt outlet. Now, as for that digital instrument cluster that I don't have a good view of, I think it still works pretty well. The digital display gives it a more modern style, and it's big enough to display all of the important stuff. So I'll give the tech a rating of 8 out of 10 because as a tech lover, there's a lot to love about the BZ4X, and I'd be perfectly happy if I had this as a daily driver. Now, when it comes to the EV performance, I think we're at that point in the industry where not every EV is going to have neck-snapping, physics-defying levels of acceleration. This BZ4X seems to be the EV for the common folk. This is an all-wheel drive model, so that means that there's 2 electric motors, 1 for each axle, and combined you'll get 214 system horsepower and a maximum 248 pound-feet of torque. With a curb weight of about 4,400 pounds, that's good to give you a 0 to 60 time of about 6.5 to 7 seconds. Now, while that's not as quick as some of the other EVs that I've tested on this channel, that is still a very reasonable level of performance for a commuter car. As for the range, again, this is the all-wheel drive model, which means that it's inherently going to have less range than the front-wheel drive model. The front-wheel drive model XLE version, you can get up to 252 electric miles, whereas this limited all-wheel drive version can only do up to 222 miles. Now, for a frame of reference, a trip from New York City to Washington, D.C. is about 226 miles, which means that if you're driving the BZ4X, you're going to have to charge in between. And when it comes to charging up the battery, if you have a level 2 charger at home, it'll take 9.5 hours to fully charge the car. If you're at a fast charging station, it'll take about 1 hour to go from low battery light to 80% state of charge. At least that's what Toyota says. You see, I pulled into an Electrify America station at about 50% state of charge, and that's when I found out that the first station was only charging at about 23 kilowatts, and that it was going to take about 270 minutes to get to 100%. My first thought was that there's something faulty with the Electrify America station. So I unplugged, plugged in at the adjacent station, and that one was giving me just a little bit more charge, but still at about the same rate. And then finally, I tried a third station, and lo and behold, still the same result. This time, it was going to take over 5 hours to get to 100%. So what is going on here? Now, normally with EVs, the more full you are in the battery state of charge anyway, the slower the charging rate is going to become. And there's a lot of other factors as well, like temperature. And if you also ever look at charging your smartphone when you are at a very low state of charge, say about 10 to 20%, to get to that 50, 60, 70, 80%, it is super quick. And then the last 20% or so, it is very slow. The same goes for the batteries in these EVs, and it's really there to just prevent any sort of damage to the battery cells. But in my case, I was only at 50% state of charge, and also the temperature outside was roughly about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and I've also been driving about 20 to 30 minutes. So what gives? So I did some digging, and a bunch of other YouTubers have covered this already. But basically, the all-wheel drive version of the BZ4X uses a different battery supplier. And this battery is capped at 100 kilowatts of charging speed, whereas the front-wheel drive battery can go up to 150 kilowatts. So perhaps there's something going on with the battery supplier. This one's from CATL or CATL, and the other front-wheel drive battery is from Panasonic. Again, that still does not explain why I was only getting 23 kilowatts charging speed at about 50% state of charge. Now, perhaps this is Toyota's way of being ultra conservative in everything that they do, and maybe they're just trying to prevent damage to the batteries. Or perhaps this is just a bug, who knows? But the bottom line is that this charging speed on the BZ4X is downright bad, because if it's going to take you about 4 to 5 hours to fully charge your car, that'll basically destroy your road trip. That road trip from New York City to Washington, D.C., which would normally take about 4 hours on a normal internal combustion engine car, may probably take about 8 to 9 hours instead in the Toyota BZ4X, and that just doesn't make much sense. And then there's other problems as well. If you look at the fine print, charging at 50 degrees or below, the charging time will increase significantly. And maybe that was the reason why I ran into such a slow charging speed, was because even though it was warmer than 50 degrees, maybe the car didn't think so. The fine print also states that if you DC charge more than twice per day, it can negatively affect charging time. And perhaps the worst part, it says that DC charging may not work on all-wheel drive BZ4X when the temperature is below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, perhaps that is the biggest design flaw of the BZ4X all-wheel drive, because the people that need all-wheel drive cars are the ones that live in those snowy and cold conditions. And the fact that they cannot fast charge this car in those conditions, that is a huge misstep. So I'll have to give the Power a rating of 2 out of 10. Now, there's probably a lot of EV buyers out there that will never touch a Electrify America station or a fast charger. They'll be perfectly content charging at home at their level 2 or level 1 charger. And if you fall into that category, then the BZ4X will be perfectly okay. But if you plan on leaving your neighborhood or going on a long road trip, then the BZ4X, the all-wheel drive anyway, will definitely let you down. And considering that it's priced at $52,000 for this limited all-wheel drive model, there is a huge list of alternative EVs that will outdrive and outcharge this thing. Now let's talk about the driving experience of the BZ4X. Understanding the poor range and charging performance, perhaps this is adding insult to injury. The BZ4X is actually a car that you want to spend a lot of time driving in, because this is a fantastic driving car. The ride quality is pretty good, just like most EVs. There's not a lot of sound or vibration that encroaches into the cabin. Meanwhile, the handling is very good. The car feels super planted and confident around corners. You look at the size of this thing and the fact that it has over 8 inches of ground clearance, you think that it's going to drive just like any other crossover or SUV, and you'd be wrong. This feels like a WRX in the twisties, just without all of the noise. And with all-wheel drive, you get access to a lot of grip, and with the instant torque of the electric motors, this car feels really capable. The steering is also top-notch. This one doesn't have the steer-by-wire function, as witnessed by the steering wheel that looks like 100% of a wheel, and it works very well. The steering effort is a little bit higher than other cars, but I actually prefer that as it feels more sporty. And then the steering feedback is also quite good. And since this has all-wheel drive, this has the X mode functionality, and you could vary the driving performance based on the surface conditions. So I'll give the driving experience a rating of 8 out of 10 because this BZ4X has pretty solid road manners and it's going to give you an enjoyable drive. Which brings us to the end of the video, and all things considered, I'll give the Toyota BZ4X a rating of 6.4 out of 10. It's really not a bad car at all. If you plan on charging at home, it's going to be a fantastic car that looks and drives great. But if you plan on taking road trips, or if you live in a colder climate, then you should probably avoid this BZ4X altogether, at least the all-wheel drive model anyway. And for the price, which is fairly steep, there's a lot of other options that's not going to let you down. Well, there you have it. Leave me your thoughts in the comments below. If you've learned something from this video, please consider hitting that like, subscribe, and that notification bell so that you can be notified anytime I make a new video. If you want to check out a review of a fantastic EV, check out this video right here. With that being said, let me wrap it up right there. I want to thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. My name's Hanson. This has been the 2023 Toyota BZ4X. I'll see you on the next one.